Welcome to Beyond Borders, the Immigration Evaluation Podcast. Whether you're just starting to explore how to add immigration evaluations to your practice, or you've been conducting evaluations for years, this is the place for you. I'm Dr. Mariella Shibley, and I can't wait to share today's episode with you. Today, I want to talk about a question that I get all the time, which is, how do you actually write an immigration evaluation report? Or what are some tips for writing the report? Because writing the report is usually the most dreaded part of the whole evaluation process, but it really shouldn't be. I think we need to reframe how we think about report writing. It shouldn't be this overwhelming thing hanging over you. It's just one more step, like the interview, like the scoring, like the conceptualization. It deserves the same calm, confident approach as everything else. I mean, why wouldn't you want to show the reader what a solid job you did? In fact, the report is the most important part of the evaluation because it's your work product. It's what the adjudicator sees. It's what they rely on to make an informed decision. And sure, it's where you get to show off your clinical skills, your assessment, your insight, your ability to connect the dots. But now that I say that out loud, I actually want to take it back a little because this isn't about you and your knowledge. The goal of the report is to inform and educate, not to impress anyone. What I meant was more like, I actually enjoy putting my thoughts into words. There's something satisfying about creating a document that reflects all the work that you put in, something useful, something solid, a final product that represents basically the fruit of your labor. So if you've ever felt stuck or anxious when it's time to write, this is why I made this episode. I'm going to walk you through my personal method broken down into sort of 5 steps. So let's get into it. Let's start at the very beginning, which is your intake. And this is honestly the most important prep step and something that makes writing your report so much easier later on. What I recommend is using an intake guide that mirrors the structure of your report. So even if the client jumps around a lot when telling their story, which most of them do, you can still organize your notes by section. So you jot things down in the right places as the interview goes on, even if you're circling back to fill in gaps later. So what this does is help you stay in the flow when you're writing. So you're not flipping pages or digging through like scribbled notes, trying to figure out where they mentioned their family situation or that one important health condition. Also, know that you're going to collect way more information than you actually include in your report, and that's totally fine. The point is not to use every detail. The point is to gather enough information so you can understand the full picture and be able to clearly and confidently explain the psychological impact that this situation is having on your client. Sometimes people worry that they're wasting time by taking more notes than they'll use, but note-taking is what helps you conceptualize the case, to figure out the diagnosis, and to know what to emphasize. It also helps you justify your conclusion, but to yourself, even if you don't spell it out in the report. All right, so now that I've got your intake game on point, step 2 is about staying organized on a bigger scale. So what I like to do is I keep a log of all my reports. And this is a huge time saver, and it helps you stay organized in the long run. So I personally do this using an Excel spreadsheet. I have a tab for each different type of report, like asylum, hardship waivers, cancellation and removal, so on. Or you could break it down by year or whatever makes sense for your workflow. So in each entry, I include the type of case, the diagnosis, the pronouns that I use throughout the report, and anything else that I may need to refer back to. So then this makes it really easy to pull up a past report that's similar to the one that you're about to write and use it as a jumping off point. So this becomes ultimately like a library of your work. So when you get a new referral, when you start a new case, you can go back and quickly find a similar case that you can use as a template. And it's also great for quality control because it helps you stay consistent and avoid sort of reinventing the wheel every time. So now let's talk about actually getting the report written. So what do we do with that template? We start with this previous report as a template, especially if it's the same type of case and diagnosis. That's basically what you're looking for, and the same pronouns. So the first thing that I do is I delete all the identifying information from the old report. Then I do a find and replace feature on Word for the client's name and the spouse's name. But you want to be careful. You definitely want to check your spelling. If you misspell the name somewhere and don't catch it, then the find replace tool won't pick it up. And you could end up with someone else's name just randomly showing up in the final version. And that's not a good way to look professional. So I actually do this when I'm finished writing a report. I go through and I make sure that the name is spelled correctly every time, so that when I go back and use the report as a template and I do the find replace feature, then I'm certain that I got all the names and that there isn't a lost misspelled name from a previous report in there. So after clearing out the identifying information, I start by writing the background section of the new report. And this part is, of course, fresh and tailored to the client that I just met with. This is where all that organized intake info comes in handy. When you use a report with the same diagnosis, it saves you from having to, number one, describe the diagnosis, and typically a lot of the test results are going to be pretty similar, meaning that people with major depressive disorder tend to experience the same type of symptoms. So when you go to the section on test results, you'll basically have to just tweak it a little bit to make sure that the symptoms are indeed the symptoms that the client endorsed on the test. But if you're using a report for that where you diagnose PTSD and now this one person has major depressive disorder, then you're going to have to change a lot of the symptoms. So little things like that can really help you write less. Now here's something that I did years ago that you might want to do. I created a document where I wrote up common diagnoses in my own words, but for a general audience. So I basically went through the DSM criteria and I rewrote each one in my own words, keeping in mind that the reader is not a mental health professional. So instead of saying something like a volition, I say something like he struggles to initiate activities or maintain motivation for things he used to enjoy. And same things with terms like psychomotor agitation or anhedonia. I skip the jargon and I say exactly what that looks like in real life. So you want to write it in a way that any adjudicator, regardless of their background, can understand and connect with. Now, these days, with AI tools, you can even ask something like, can you describe PTSD in a few sentences using simple non-clinical language? And then you tweak it so that it sounds like you. And you just copy and paste it onto the report. So I recommend doing this for the most common diagnoses that you see in immigration work, like depression, anxiety, PTSD, adjustment disorder, etc. And you can do the same thing for the tests that you use. I actually have another sheet where I keep descriptions of the assessments that I use most often. So in that little blurb, I describe what the test is, why I administered it, and what the results show. So that way, when I'm writing the report, I can just paste that in, followed by, of course, the specific scores from the client, which again, if you're using a previous report as a template, you would already have the test descriptions in place. Loving this episode? I've got something to make your life even easier. Grab my free introductory guide to immigration evaluations linked in the description box. It's a game changer for ensuring your reports meet legal standards. Let me know what you think. Now, on to the next step. Now that you've got the structure down and you're in writing mode, here's the golden rule. Don't over-explain. It's really easy to feel like you need to justify every single clinical decision that you make, especially if you're newer to this work. But your job isn't to convince anyone with volume. It's to present clear, relevant, and well-supported information. You want to include just enough detail that the adjudicator feels confident that you've done your due diligence, that you asked the right questions, that you considered the nuances, and that you took your role seriously. But you do not need to put every single nuance into the report. In fact, you will most likely take a lot more notes than you actually end up writing in the report, because including too much can potentially hurt your client by oversharing things that aren't relevant, or by making the report so long that the key points get lost. And most importantly, there's also a privacy issue. If your client shares something extremely personal, but it doesn't actually relate to the psycholegal question, then don't include it, because it's not about hiding things. It's about protecting your client while still doing your job with integrity. So you want to keep your report concise and to the point, and most importantly, relevant. I always say less is more. Clean, clear, and direct is always the goal. And of course, less writing for you too. And finally, don't wait too long to write your report. The closer you are to the interview, the more vivid your memory will be. You'll remember not just what was said, but how it was said. You'll recall the tone, body language, any hesitation, all those subtle things that don't always show up in your notes. Especially if you're doing several evaluations or you have patients in between the evaluations, these little details can easily get lost. So if for whatever reason you're not able to start writing the report, or at least the background, which is the most important part, I don't mean in the report itself. It's just that the background history and the behavioral observations are what are really specific to each client, and the sooner you transfer it from your head onto paper, the better. So if you don't have time to write at least the background section, maybe jot down some of your observations in the margins of your intake guide so that when you sit down to write the report, you can easily go back to it and remember. So for example, something like, oh yeah, this is the guy that was very guarded and minimizing his symptoms. Or you can write a little note saying, not sure if it's adjustment disorder or GAD, check test results. Anything that will aid you in the writing of the report later on. Now, here's my strong opinion on this. The worst thing that you can do, in my opinion, is write the report in little chunks, like one paragraph here, another paragraph an hour later, then maybe another section in between patients. Why? Because if you're doing it right, you're going to have to be constantly reading it back from the beginning to track the flow and the consistency. If you're jumping in and out of the report without rereading what you've already written, you run the risk of being repetitive, redundant, or even missing important pieces. So if you do write in chunks, because, life happens, make sure to go back and reread the whole thing from the top before picking it up again. Otherwise, the report might sound disjointed, or worse, include contradictions. And of course, this will make your report writing process much, much longer, which is why I recommend not doing it that way. So ideally, block off time and try to write it in one sitting, or at most in a couple of close together sessions. You'll save yourself so much editing time later. All right, so we can wrap this up, and here's a quick recap of the 5 tips that I just gave. 1 is use an intake guide that follows your report structure to stay organized from the start. 2 is keep a log. Use Excel or something like that to track your past reports and make future writing faster by step 3, using past reports as templates. And build a document library for diagnoses and test descriptions. Keep your reports clean and relevant. Don't overshare, and protect your client's privacy. And lastly, write while it's fresh in your mind. And try to do it in one sitting to keep the flow and tone consistent. Your memory and, most importantly, future self will thank you for that. So if you found this helpful, please share this episode with a colleague or leave a quick review. As a matter of fact, I would love it if you could at least rate the podcast. It's still relatively new, so it will be super helpful if you could just take a second to rate it. And if you've created your own templates or tools that help you write faster, or if you have other tips, I'd love to hear about them. Thanks for listening. Keep doing the impactful work that you're doing, and I'll talk to you soon. That's a wrap up for today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a fellow mental health provider who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe so you don't miss my next episode.